This is a Film Stories original podcast.
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Welcome to the X-Cast, X-Files Podwatch, episode 32, covering Syzygy and Grotesque. I'm your host, Zach Moore, and with me is author of Opening the X-Files, a critical history of the original series, Mr. Darren Mooney. What's up, Darren?
Nothing much. Again, I like that we sort of have this regular routine where we meet up once a year to talk about the X-Files.
Fine, sure, whatever. So we're going to start our discussion today talking about Syzygy, which I think I'm pronouncing that right. There's not enough vowels in that word. I guess Y is sometimes a vowel. I don't know, but it's hard to say. But anyway, Syzygy, written by Chris Carter, directed by Rob Bowman, and aired on January 26th, 1996. And right off the top, I got to say, whoa, Ryan Reynolds is in the X-Files? Who knew?
Baby Ryan Reynolds doing like a weird Boston accent. It was like a brother to me.
But his stint didn't last long in this episode, did it?
No, it didn't. Ryan Reynolds' career attempt 1.0 sort of landed with a bit of a thud. But don't worry, Ryan Reynolds' career attempt 6.0 took off perfectly.
After a few false starts, he found his footing, guys.
I love that somebody as movie star attractive as Ryan Reynolds, that he has to work so hard to be a movie star, sort of fills me with pride. I feel less bad about failing when I watch Ryan Reynolds.
Not everyone can be a leading man, as Ryan Reynolds has very much established. But this episode, I like that. I don't know if this is what happened or not, but I feel like maybe Chris Carter tried to incorporate some Darren Morgan flavor into one of his episodes, because it felt in the same vein as a Darren Morgan episode, kind of the irreverent comedy of it all and the self-awareness. So I really enjoyed this one, because Darren Morgan's my favorite writer for the X-Files, and I feel like Chris Carter was taking a page from his book and trying out his approach maybe to an episode.
Yeah, one of the things that really bugs me about Syzygy, and it's something that bugs me when I watch the series like in a row, one after the other, is the fact that Syzygy comes right after War of the Carpophages, which is obviously Darren Morgan's cockroach episode. And, like, it's just really weird to go from, and I think you could argue that War of the Copperphages is, like, Darren Morgan writing a Chris Carter script, in that it's a script about, it's about aliens invading a small town. And then you can argue Syzygy is Chris Carter writing a Darren Morgan script, which is the exact opposite of this. But it's just, like, it feels like, when I watch Syzygy, I'm always reminded that I've seen a lot of the same ideas done a lot better, like, immediately prior to this. And I feel like I don't hate Syzygy. I think it's grand. I think it's quirky. I think it has some very good jokes in it. But I think it's not as strong as it needs to be coming where it is in the season. Like, it's one of the interesting things about the third season as a whole, and it's interesting that's why Syzygy is positioned where it is, the 14th episode of the season, I believe. 13th episode of the season. And it's at the halfway point, where you have this weird thing in the third season. If you folded the third season, you'd end up with, like, Syzygy and War of the Copperphages facing each other. You'd end up with the two mythology episodes at the end, and you'd end up with the two mythology episodes lined 4 episodes down from the middle. They're separated by 8 episodes each side. So there's this weird symmetry to the season that I think plays very well with Syzygy, which is about like this alignment, this rare alignment of things that are sort of lined up perfectly. And the term itself, I think, is from Jungian psychology, if I remember correctly. It's this idea of like two contrasts, and Jung's prime example is that, you know, the most obvious example is male and female, which is this idea of opposites attracting. And you could say that Mulder and Scully are themselves like a Syzygy. They're two opposites that find themselves in alignment together.
Yeah, their antagonism at the start of the episode was kind of a WTF, you know? But then like, oh, okay, as the episode kind of unravel and explain things, you're like, oh, okay. But then even at the end, there was a little bit of that hadn't quite worn off yet, even though the girl's powers had ended with the astrological alignment. Yeah,
the stroke of midnight. Which I like. I like the corniness of the episode. Like, I like the idea that it unfolds. Like, it almost feels like Mulder and Scully have gone to like Riverdale from the Archie comics, because there's a scene where after they murder the girl at the party with the mirror, they go to visit the boy, and the boy is sitting there in a diner. And he's wearing, like, his team jacket. And it does look like this sort of 1950s Americana sort of stuff. And then when you couple that with, like, the use of the Keystone Cops, it feels like Carter's writing an episode that's... Like, Mulder and Scully haven't just wandered to a small American town. They've almost wandered to, like, 1950s America somehow. Like, there's this weird timelessness that I really, really like about the episode.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the jokes and one-liners. And, you know, one of my favorite is, again, a microcosm of Mulder's and Scully's debates, right? They're at Ryan Reynolds' funeral. And the coffin bursts into flames, and he's like, maybe we're just imagining that. Like, yes, thank you, Mulder.
I like how snide Mulder is in this episode. Like, Scully's obviously really aggressive as well, but Mulder is like, Scully is passive aggressive with the sure, fine, whatever. But Mulder is like very, very, like, he's not just embarrassing Scully, he's like leaning in close and like he's making sotto comments that she can hear about how crazy she is and how ridiculous she is. And he's like bad-mouthing her to other people, whereas Scully's animus is directed primarily at Mulder, which is kind of interesting, I think.
Talking about the deaths and stuff, of all the, you know, we see a lot of death in this episode, but I gotta say, the one that stuck with me most is the one with the collapsing bleachers. Because those have always worried me for the exact reasons displayed in this episode. You know, do you guys have those over there across the pond?
No, we don't. Well, we don't generally have sort of school auditoriums like that. We don't really have like basketball courts that are indoors and stuff like that. We have like community halls that double as like when I went to school, we had like a little shop in there, and it'd be the assembly hall and stuff like that. But it wouldn't be like, we wouldn't have cheerleaders. We wouldn't have that culture of sport. When we played sport, it would typically be like GAA, or football, which you go and you play out in a pitch. So we don't really have those sort of... I never had those fears. Although, the moment that I saw them in like film and television, my mind immediately went to where this episode goes. It's like, that seems like a very unsafe thing to have around hormonal teens who are very clumsy.
Yeah, in high school, we would, you know, go sit in the gym sometimes when you get to school. It's a holding area. And I'd always think to myself, man, like... I'm not getting behind this thing because like you could be deep in those bleachers and somebody could close it and then there you go. This episode shows you what could happen. So
compress sack.
Exactly. Oh man, but yeah, this was a fun one. It was, and I didn't think about it coming right after War of the Copenhagens. Did I say that right? I always think I say it differently every time to make sure I say it right eventually. So.
As I said before, I'm used to writing words down. It took me years to figure out I was saying Sieg or Segway wrong.
Segway, yeah.
It took forever until somebody politely corrected me.
But we have to unravel the mystery of the horny beast. So
it's so sleazy. It's so ridiculously sleazy. I'm actually amazed at how much they got away with. You don't think she's a virgin, do you? I don't even think she's a blonde.
All right, our next episode is Grotesque, written by Howard Gordon, directed by Kim Manners, and aired on February 2nd, 1996. So a Groundhog Day episode, huh?
Yep.
I have a tradition on Groundhog Day. I always watch Groundhog Day, the Bill Murray movie. One of my favorite movies of all time. I really think it's an amazing movie. Not only is it an amazing comedy, but an amazing movie all the same. So,
do you watch it from like midnight to midnight over and over again? Because I feel like
Yes.
that would capture the spirit of Groundhog Day quite well.
I put it on the player and I just put repeat, and it's just going all day long. But anyway, Grotesque, Grotesque, not an episode I would mind watching all day long either. Actually, I really enjoyed this episode. We talked about Irresistible a few episodes back, and this is another one of those episodes that toes the line between, is there something supernatural going on here? Is there not? Again, it's left up to interpretation. I do feel like, Kurtwood Smith's character, he's under the influence of something. It might have been the case breaking him. It might have been a demon, but I appreciate the ambiguity here.
Yeah, no, I absolutely adore Grotesque. Like, I mean, the third season of The X-Files is one of the best, 24-episode season of television ever. To the point where I think there are only really two duds in it, which are, obviously The Blessing Way, and I think then Tezo Does Beach Us. Grotesque is a fantastic episode, and I think that, the ambiguity that you mention... one of the things I really appreciate about Grotesque is it's written so well. I don't mean that in a dialogue prose sort of way. I mean that in just a technical sense. The mystery at the heart of the story is at once a very fair play mystery, but it also has a lot of really nice sort of twists and turns in it. So, for example, when they're arresting Mostow at the start of the episode, he bites one of the agents on the hands. And repeatedly through the episode, there are references to that. It's son of a bitch, bit me! And then Scully's Stitches, yeah, he bit me. And it's sort of set up to make you think, did the monster transfer itself through the bite?
That is exactly what I thought as well, because I felt like that guy... he has way too much screen time to just be a random assistant, but that he's a perfect red herring, right?
He is. It's beautifully set up, and I mean even when you get to the reveal that it's been Patterson all along, that's also set up in a way that a canny viewer who's watching the episode and trying to pick it apart can figure it out as well. Because the bit where the glass blower is attacked, right, and the glass blower isn't killed, and he's in surgery, he's in the hospital, he's on the bed recovering. His heartbeat starts beating really crazy when Patterson comes into the room, and the way the scene's set up, you have the excuse of, okay, well, they're talking about Mostow and they're talking about the crime, so maybe that's what got him excited. But when you figure out that Patterson is actually the one doing it, you're oh wait, it's because he recognizes Patterson. That's why his heart started going like that. I think it's a very, very good, just as a mystery piece of television. It's not a mystery primarily, it's a psychological thriller. But even as a mystery, it's so well written.
Yeah, and even if you want to go back and rewatch it and try to find all the clues, the shadow that we see in that scene as well, you're oh, okay, that could be Kurtwood Smith. He has the same kind of outline as a gargoyle, right?
No offense to Kurtwood Smith, who I love. But yeah, he does have a slight gargoyle-ish demeanor, perhaps, might be the way to put it. He's so good in this. He's so good in everything, but he's so good in this. Patterson is not really a character, in that it's more about, Mulder's descent into, a Thomas Harris novel. But, Patterson comes across, you get what you need out of Patterson so quickly. You get that he's gruff. He's the withholding dad. He's like Skinner if Skinner, didn't have, he makes Skinner look warm.
Yet another disapproving dad from Mulder, right? How many disapproving dads does he need? Gosh.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. This one doesn't end up dead. This one just ends up locked in a psychiatric ward.
Again, if you work in the FBI and you've been associated with Mulder before, bad things are going to happen to you. I mean, look at Scully.
Yeah.
It's everybody, right? There's no escape from Scully's spiral of death.
Yeah, spiral of doom. The event horizon. It's when you look at Patterson, you think he got off kind of light. I mean, he's got a 3 squares and a cot,
So what do you think happened? Which side of the fence do you go toward? Do you feel like Patterson just lost his mind, or do you feel like there truly was a demon at work here?
I think that Grotesque is... being honest, I think that Patterson just lost his mind, because I think Grotesque is very clearly written in a sense of... Well, first of all, I think Howard Gordon has a tendency to write, more than other writers in the X-Files, I think he has a tendency to write episodes that are not explicitly supernatural. F. Emasculata sort of comes to mind, where that's there's no real supernatural element there, it's just a virus. I think that with Grotesque, what you have is this idea, and it's sort of like we talked about with Irresistible, where it's you have the concept of evil, which is something that sort of interests Carter and Spotnitz and Howard across the run of the show, Gordon across the run of the show. But you have this idea of evil as a corrupting influence on man, and it's it doesn't have to be literal. It's interesting that the episode after this, they introduce the concept of the black oil, which is the ultimate embodiment of infectious evil in the world. But that with or shortly after this, they introduce the black oil. But with Grotesque, I think there's something compelling in the idea that, like, when you study evil, when you stare at evil, when you look into the abyss, that sort of Nietzschean idea that the abyss stares back at you. And it's kind of, it is the core of, like, these serial killer narratives. Like, people always talk about how Scully is very clearly influenced by Clarence Starling, by the character that Jodie Foster played in Silence of the Lambs. But I think that people overlook how much, say, Mulder owes to the character of Will Graham from the early books from Red Dragon. Like, there's a sense that Mulder is like this brilliant profiler who had a sort of a breakdown. Of course, his breakdown was triggered by the memory of his sister being abducted, and then he ended up working the X-Files. But that he stared at evil every day, and he tried to figure out what evil was, and that sort of took a toll on him. And, like, there's a sense that Grotesque is one of those core narratives, and it's like Brian Fuller's Hannibal. It's like Thomas Harris's Red Dragon. And to be honest, it's like the true story of John Douglas from Mindhunter, the guy who inspired Will Graham, where he was tracking the Green River serial killer in Seattle, and he had a bit of a breakdown in his room. Like, he was found in his underwear lying on the floor in his hotel room because he just had so much. And there's this sense that, like, there's so much evil in the world that when you absorb it, when you take it in, it can't help but sort of contaminate you. Like, I really like the ambiguity in the episode, the suggestion that Mulder obviously doesn't kill anybody because he's a regular character on the show. Like, it's very hard to do an X-Files TV show where Mulder is in prison for most of the time. So, like, Mulder obviously could never have been the killer in this. But there's a sense that, like, when he's doing this, he is flirting with darkness. Like, he's having the nightmares and the visions. Like, he imagines himself cutting himself across the face in the same way that, like, we discovered the other FBI agent has been slashed across the face, the sort of Glasgow smile effect. Like, there's a sense that, like, when you open yourself up to evil in the world, like, that sort of comes at you and creeps at you. And it is, like, you mentioned Irresistible at the start, and, like, Kim Manners, who directed it and who does a tremendous job directing it, he argues that this was a key influence in, like, Carter's sort of creation of Millennium, which he would do the following year. And that you can see, like, its influence in later episodes, like, obviously Paper Hearts, written by Vince Gilligan, but Empedocles, for example, written in the 8th season, which has a similar sort of concept, which is, like, what if evil is infectious? What if evil passes from person to person? What if evil's viral? Which is, like, a big fixation, I think, of the X-Files. The X-Files has this weird fixation that I think is rooted in, like, the AIDS pandemic, where everything is treated as infectious and contaminating and sort of corrupting. And I like the idea in Grotesque. Like, I think it's a metaphor. I think it's strictly metaphorical. But I think it's powerful nonetheless. I think that, like, the fact that Patterson was not infected by a demon or that he was not possessed by a ghost doesn't make the episode any less effective.
Well, I think it was a demon, but that's just me. But,
sorry about that.
But yeah, for more of my thoughts on this episode, stay tuned, because my very first episode of the X-Cast was Grotesque, and that's where I answer my 5 questions of X that we all answer. Back due to a disturbance in the space-time continuum, that episode is yet to air. This is back when they were doing fan favorites, at the start before Tony decided to go in chronological order. So that episode it's currently on a shelf, and it will be broadcast in season 3 when Grotesque comes. So
a bit of a teaser.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that, guys. All right, Darren, it's been fun talking about these 2 episodes of The X-Files with you today. If people want to find you out there on the internet, where can they find you?
I run the movie blog, which is spelt with a 0. You can find it just by Googling my name and movie blog. I write on Twitter at Darren_Mooney. I co-host a podcast, The 250, which looks at the IMDb's top 250 movies of all time. We release episodes once every 2 weeks. You can find us on Twitter at The 250. We're also on Black Hole Media's Podbean, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever good podcasts are available. I also might have a book coming out about the X-Files, Opening the X-Files, which is available on Amazon, where all good books are sold. So please, if you're interested in any of those things, feel free to check them out.
Awesome. As for me, you can find me personally on Twitter at MoronZach. That's MOOREONZACH. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Hold On to Smallville, where we talk about each and every episode of that young Superman show. You can find us on Twitter at Always Smallville with 1 S. And I'm also the host of Standard Orbit, a Star Trek The Original Series podcast over on the Trek FM network. And you can find us on Twitter at Trek FM. As for the X-Cast, you can find us on Twitter at the X_cast and on Facebook, our page and our fan group, the X-Cast X-Files Podcast fan group. So just search the X-Cast on Facebook and you will find us there. Well, the Podwatch will be back tomorrow covering Pipe and Maru and Apocrypha. But until then, trust no one.